right, so now moving to our second speaker. We are honored to have Babusi Hill, a visionary leader who has spent 25 years protecting our land. She has spearheaded national projects that successfully cut land degradation by half, making her a true champion of our natural habitat. Ms. Babusi Hill, we are so happy to have you as our second speaker. The screen is all yours.
This one is about on efforts to manage prosopis in Botswana. And as we introduced myself earlier on, my name is Baitepi Hill, and I'm the Director of Forestry and Range Resources in the Ministry of Environment and Tourism of Botswana. To start with, this prosopis, we have a common name for it in Botswana, which is called Sikanana, and it is a genus of hardy drought-tolerant trees, shrubs, and is originally from America. It was introduced in Botswana and other African countries mainly for shade. And then in our case, we started with the Kalahari, where we have a stabilization of our sand dunes. And then we also tried with on-land rehabilitation and fuel wood supply, and as well as fodder. Those were the years when we didn't know about how it's going to behave. So it was initially introduced in the Kalahari area to control the certification, as studies many have gone through studies to try to establish where this was coming from. So while communities benefit from its fuel wood and shade, unmanaged expansion poses significant risk to livelihoods and biodiversity. That is just a map of showing where we started with it. It's a national concern. It contributes to the rangeland degradation because of its characteristics, which is a key issue in Botswana. It reduces biodiversity because it takes over as an invader. It takes over the natural habitat of our indigenous or local plants and becomes prominent. Those pictures are just showing some of how we've been able to cut it through or to remove it through different methods. It increased management costs for government. Every year in Botswana, because this falls under my department, we estimate about 4 million pula, which is about close to $3 million per annum, just to control prosopis. This makes it a priority species under invasive plant species within the forestry and rangeland sectors in Botswana. So why has it become of economic importance or environmental importance? Its deep roots can access groundwater. In some of the studies that we've had done, it has gone as far as 50 meters, which means that if we have a borehole, even beyond 50 meters, it would be able to drain that borehole. We had studies where we shared nodes with South Africa, particularly in the Eastern and Western Cape, where some of our people went there to go and witness the rangeland that has been completely degraded, and some of the boreholes that were dried because of prosopis when we were comparing nodes between the two countries. The seeds are dispersed easily because when this pod-like plants, the pods can be eaten, and if they are not completely digested, it means that all the animals that eat those seeds will be able to disperse it and to go to other areas. Right now, we are seeing a lot of coverage of this invasive plant across the country, and we are even worried that it is threatening our important heritage sites like the Okavango Delta. So hence, we are making a point that we try to cut it before it goes there. It has the ability to regrow or resprout after cutting, so hence it's very important to utilize the methods that will be able to control it completely if you have to engage any method of removal. Since if you fail to do it right, you must just make it worse. It tolerates drought and poor soils because where it is right now, it has taken advantage of the poor soils where other plants or other trees can grow, and it's really doing well there. We have quite a number of actions that we are doing as the country. The government has taken prosopis to become something more important than just an invader. Hence, we have decided to utilize it for other sources. The one plant or the one species that has been found to become highly invasive in Botswana is the genera called prosopis juliflora, which has become very invasive and is spreading beyond the intended areas and is transforming all the ecosystems in the country. So it has become naturalized and expanding into areas which have never had it. So like I mentioned, even in the cities, we are seeing it coming. That's why we are talking about, we want to make sure that it doesn't come near the Okavango Delta. And some of the areas that we are seeing as the hotspot of these invasive species include the Kalahari district, the Kwene, Mabutsani, and Good Hope. These are the areas which are in the western and the southern part of the country. And now we are seeing it a lot of times in the Ngamiland and Buteki areas, which are in the northern part of the country. And then I spoke about why we need to control it as an environmental problem. Botswana has put in place it takes a bit of time for it to change to actions to manage prosopis, because this is my intention is to talk about how we are now trying to manage it as an invader, because it has now become an invader and an opportunistic plant in the later years. We have, as a country, used integrated approaches to control the species, and we also have brought in some utilization to uplift community livelihoods. So to say to use it or implement this interchangeably to make sure that we put livelihoods within the management of the prosopis, at the same time trying to bring down how the bad impact of it to turn them into opportunities. In this case, we have there's a project in the Boravast area. This area covers is an abbreviation of areas called Boravast, which includes it's implemented in areas called Boxspitz, Rappelspan, Valhoek, and Strasendam. And those are the areas in Kalahari district. And the project started in 2020, where we are trying to turn this project or the prosopis into useful products. I was on the project where I was talking about supporting communities to utilize prosopis in different forms, where they produce charcoal, as we can see in the picture. They are also able to produce fodder and firewood. And the project was funded by EU, and it was led by the UNDP with our ministry, different departments. And then another project which was supporting the same group was the Kalahari Khansi Dryland project, also which was funded by Jeff. Like as I mentioned, it was a project that was spearheaded by the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, together with UNDP as our partner. And then the funding was from both EU and as well as the funding from the Global Environmental Facilities. It was able to convert prosopis into charcoal and firewood. It was also making it easy for people to have jobs. And then they were trying at the same time removing the invasive species, and then turning it into those economic viabilities that would help the livelihoods of people in the Boravast area. So that is just one of them among them, but other people are already joining in who are interested in producing charcoal, because reliance on firewood also is a serious problem in the country, because we're seeing a lot of people cutting live trees trying to make a living out of firewood. So it was like trying to utilize that space of prosopis to come up with those projects. Some of the government actions also in terms of management strategies of prosopis included different methods to cut the species itself, because it was going into taking over the rangeland, and it was reducing the biodiversity. And we brought it in the land restoration strategies to cut them, to remove this prosopis so that we can replace it with our locals or indigenous species within Botswana. The project on the management of invasive alien species is covered under our national development planning, whereby we have also introduced through the second transitional national development plan, and then it was recommended that we focus on the mapping of the prosopis and control of other invasive species, as submitted by the first speaker from Ori, Dr. Kashe. The project consisted of 3 components, where we have to do the national land surveying and mapping of the invasive species, the management and control of the priority, and including the prosopis itself, and development of the national invasive alien plant species management strategy, as alluded to by the first speaker. These are the things that sometimes we want to make sure that all other stakeholders are aware of, because they tend to become government-led rather than institution-led. Because if all stakeholders are part of the whole setup, they would be able to know that these are the strategies that we put in place. For instance, the Ministry of Environment and Tourism would have those conventions that we are party to, like CBD, UNCCD, and other conventions that are supposed to be dealing with, and we'll be coming up with national strategies like in the NBSAP, and that we are all desk officers in there, and we want to see a lot of scholars, universities, and other institutions like BUs being part of this setup, so that they can understand what we come up with from conventions, what we agree on, and the strategies that we need to implement as a country. So these are the things that we want to see happening. Still on this slide is where I want to mention the fact that we don't just come up with strategies to put them on the side. We want to bring out the strategies that will make a difference. Hence the reason why, when this prosopis was giving us a problem as a country, we started to benchmark with South Africa and Namibia to share notes on how they are doing it, and came up with the national management strategy of the prosopis within the country, where we wanted to see all the methods that we could put in place to either eradicate, control, or manage it in the nation. So those are the reasons why we come up with strategies. Still under management of the prosopis here as government, we are at the moment involving a lot of different methods that are there in place that have already been mentioned earlier on. We involve a lot of communities to uproot the plant, because we want to make it usable to the people who are there, who have been affected by the plant, to at least benefit from its eradication. At the moment, this budget that I was talking about, up to 4 million pula, or $3 million US, we're talking about involving the people who would indirectly benefiting from uprooting it through mechanical methods. So by doing so, we are trying to ensure that there's beneficiation to the people who are affected by the plant. And because it requires a combination of control measures, we also use the mechanical methods where we physically remove it. And then lately, we also introduced the chemical methods, where we use some chemicals that are supposed to be less persistent to the environment, as per the plant health regulation within Botswana. So these are typically where we have to pour the gallon 4 trifluorophyrum in the stem of the root of the plant to be able to kill it. It has been very successful to do so, because after killing it that way, we still can utilize the rest of the plant to make firewood and charcoal out of it. So because of that, we've been able to, through that project, we've been able to remove 6,122 hectares of land that has been invaded by prosopis. And we were able to continuously replant, because we are using this strategy to replant our indigenous plants, plants as part of the restoration strategy within Botswana. And then when you go further to talk about ecological and scientific approaches, like I mentioned, there's need to holistically approach the management of prosopis through all the methods that are available. So this includes studies, and then how to see its distribution and all the kinds of mechanical methods, if they're effective. And then the mention of indigenous trees for restoration, to make sure that we replace them, because they've already occupied a place, so we could not leave in the places bare. At the moment, there's a project that we have collaborated with the University of Botswana, because we don't know how far this plant has spread within the country. We know that it is already approaching cities from Kalahari all the way to the cities and all over the country. So we've now engaged the University of Botswana to conduct a study for the government at a cost, obviously. And then the University of Botswana, they're using different methods of identifying or trying to study of how this plant has spread through geographical distribution and spread. And then the initial, and it's from its initial area of introduction, like particularly the Kalahari. The project started in October 2024, and it is expected to end this financial year, which is 31st of March. And we are hoping that by now they are concluding the project to show us how the prosopis has spread within the country. We are working with the Faculty of Engineering and Technology, and we've launched this project nationwide. The goal here is to analyze the partial and temporal spread of this invasive species using GIS and remote sensing, as well as machine learning models. And we are not only stopping there. We want to create impact from this study, and the baseline data will be generated to drive, which will also give us evidence-based decision making on how we can manage the prosopis. So this is not just going to be ending there. We are going to be utilizing the information to ensure that it's also utilized on future management of the species, because at the moment we are saying where it's not highly dense or it's not highly populated, we are trying to quickly remove it before it spreads towards the Okavango Delta and replacing it there. So we'll be moving backwards towards where it started, and that's hence the study is going to assist the country in that manner. There are some recommendations that we've come up as a country. We have decided that we will go to, I talked about obviously that there are some different controls like mechanical, chemical, biological, and the utilization of charcoal, like what I've talked about. But the one about the collaboration with University of Botswana is one of the biggest accomplishment, because we are currently at 89% completion of the project, and we will be able to produce a national map or distribution map of where the prosopis will be able, where it is within the country. That project will enable us to target the interventions that are necessary and improve on our planning, resource allocation, and build on things like that. When I talk about recommendations or strategic recommendations, we want to see scaling up of the integrated management of prosopis to expand the control, where we'll also prioritize early detection and rapid response. We believe that those are the key to managing prosopis. We also want to strengthen on policy and enforcement. There are a lot of legal instruments that are there as Dr. Kashe has mentioned, we don't have a specific one to talk about invasive species, but they are always implied. So we need to strengthen our legal instruments. So far, lately, we have the Forest and Land Resources Act of 2025. Within this law, as I've heard from my colleague from South Africa, we have other species which can be airborne and others which can skip the inspectors at the border post. But at the moment, with our legislation, we don't allow any introduction of new species within our territories, not even to cross to other countries through all these legal instruments like the Plant Health Act and the Forest and Land Resources Act of 2025. We want to ensure that everyone is covered, even across borders, because we have intentions to curb spread across borders. We also want to strengthen on biological control. Research is required here because studies, if they are done properly, we want to see high level institutions like BIUS, Ori and University of Botswana engaging in studies of how to find, even Buang here, Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, engaging students to study more on invasive species, including prosopis, how we can control them using biological without necessarily harming the environment. And then we also want to expand these community-based models, not to only be in the Kalahari where they started. We want to see a lot of people engaging in making sure that when they are managing the species, they are also being able to benefit from them, so that there's a long-term control on cost. For instance, at the moment, we have been approached by different people who are already working with the wood to make different type of furniture from prosopis wood. They would cut it and utilize it for furniture. That is a step in the right direction, because once they keep on cutting it, at some point we'll be moving towards where we won't see it growing to other areas which has not been there. And then the community-based models that I talked about, which can be replicated beyond the Kalahari and ensure sustainable regulated utilization. And then we'll be able to restore affected ecosystems by promoting indigenous trees. Our department, my department, the Department of Forestry and Range Resources, is basically the appointed competent authority and the regulator to ensure that there's no other plant species which can enter the country without a proper indication of what type of plant it is, and if it has any trace of being invasive. We know very well that any plant can become invasive as long as it becomes it finds a suitable ground. Like when we brought in prosopis in the 80s, we never knew that it would one day become a problem, and the government would be spending so much money just to control it. Now here we are dealing with something that we wish we had never brought. So this is why we are now a gatekeeper, a regulator, and making sure that all the countries that are involved, that's why this department has become a desk officer in development of the NDSAP, as well as studies within, because we have a research unit collaborating with research institutes to ensure that any other thing that is known is taken care of. With the national planning, like I mentioned earlier, we have just mentioned that, we've just come up with an idea that if Botswana, all the institutions that are dealing with invasive plants, like water affairs is dealing with aquatic, agriculture is dealing with bioflora, and we are dealing with, we should come up with an approach of managing all those species in a way that will benefit the country and at a cost-effective manner. And that's why we've introduced the project to the national development planning. And lastly, we want to utilize data for decision making as just the study that has been recommended, that is being concluded with the University of Botswana, is going to guide us to how we will be able to move forward as a country. There's also the collaboration between countries. I cannot leave Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and other neighboring countries without involving them on how we are managing certain species within the country, because some of these species are a thorn to all of us, since we have cross-border agreements. We have Zamcom in the north, and then we also have the boundaries that allow that are not fenced, and they have waters. We have the Molopo and Limpopo rivers. We have the Zambezi River. We have Okavango River. These are all borders which have got no fences. They are only bordered by rivers which can simply spread the invasive species that we are dealing with. Hence, we need to take them further beyond just the SADC region, but take them to the UN, where we have better discussions and we can come up with better resolutions that can help the entire region or even beyond the region. Because when I went to Kenya, I realized that Kenyans were also complaining of the prosopis itself. They were saying that ever since that animal came in their country, their animals had nowhere to graze. And then I also had a chance to discuss with Somalia and Ethiopia. They're saying the same thing, that they don't have grazing areas because of prosopis. It means that it calls for action for all of us as the region and as Africa and elsewhere, particularly scholars, to integrate in the study and make sure that we make meaningful discussions so that we can move forward to manage this prosopis. Not necessarily prosopis itself, but all the invasive species that are troubling us as Africa, which are taking over or they're becoming opportunistic plants within our country. Anyway, let me just go towards the conclusion to say that Botswana represents a classic example. I mean, to say prosopis in Botswana represent a classic case of an introduced solution became an ecological challenge. Prosopis started as something that we thought we're going to help degraded areas. We're going to stabilize sand dunes. We're going to provide shade because it was so bright green and beautiful. We didn't know that it would grow that long down the root system to go and fetch all the water underground and then suddenly replace all our indigenous plants. While it continues to provide localized benefits, its rapid spread threatens the very foundation of Botswana's rangelands economy, water security, and biodiversity. Hence, that is why when we discuss issues of the International Day of Forest or Water, we try to put these things side by side to ensure that there's integration between the celebration or commemorations of these days, because they are linked. If I take care of my plants, I'm taking care of the environment, and I'm taking care of the water bodies. And at the same time, when the scholars bring in their studies to ensure that they get their PhDs and their professorship, they also are making it easier for me to make policy decisions that can be able to guide on the control and moving forward to ensure that there's a livelihood that are looked after. So the government has made significant progress by shifting towards integrated science-based and community-driven management. However, sustained investment, strong policy implementation, and scaled-up interventions are essential to contain, control, and ultimately reduce the impact of prosopis. So this plant, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a problem, but I would love us to understand that we don't want it anymore. It looks so beautiful as you saw in the pictures, but its root system is also damaging our water bodies below, and is also invading the whole country. Very soon we will not know if there was ever any combretum that ever grew in a certain area, because it will have overtaken that ecosystem. So with those, ladies and gentlemen, I submit this is the end of my presentation.
I should say this was very informative. And I know Kim had asked earlier on about what the department is doing. So Kim, I saw your question, but I knew Babus is gonna touch on it. And yes, she did on that. And what I loved most is how you are involving the community in dealing with this invasive species, making them like get involved. That is very nice. And I love how you made it clear that this is a problem for the whole continent, and calling up that we can work together to fight this.
But I see Dr. Kesha has a hands up. Yes, probably can go with you first.
Yes, mine is just a comment that was also highlighted by the director, just to add on it, just that sometimes we forget the infrastructure damage that is done by this weed. That one is as serious as the ecological impact. The damage to boreholes, pipes, the damage to the pipes that connect to the water, the residential areas. Because even last year I was in one of the areas called Ganzi that is also affected by this plant. I literally saw the root system go into the pipe, the toilet pipe, and it was burst open. There was water all over. Next to that building again, I saw the plant going right inside the manhole of the septic tank. So the infrastructure damage is as good as the ecological part. So it's a serious invasive plant. But interestingly, when you interact with the communities, I mean, I don't know the proportions, but you know they tend to say they don't want it to be completely eradicated. They just want it to reduce in a population where they can live with it, because to them it really stabilizes the sand dunes. And sometimes they joke and say they are now used to it as being part of the ecosystem to such an extent that they're trying to imagine what will be there if we remove prosopis. But notwithstanding that, the ecological and the infrastructure damage far outweigh the benefits that we can derive from this plant. I think these are just a few comments.
I think I want to go with the first question from Kim. Kim, do you mind if you unmute your microphone and ask your question?
Right, I was wondering, I mean, this is the first I've heard of prosopis. Is it spreading Gaborone side? Because I thought I heard the presentator saying it was reaching our cities, which is the Notwani River catchment area. Would that be a concern in terms of water security?
But the problem is that it's not about eradication or not eradicating it. It's about managing to ensure that there's no spread. Because if we continue to leave it unattended, it will spread so dangerously. So that's hence our forward thinking was to ensure that it's not there. We'll have to replace it with plants that cannot be that invasive because of the damage that has been alluded to, like damage to infrastructure, as well as draining the boreholes. If you can imagine you drilling a borehole for 250,000 rands or 25,000 US dollars, and then suddenly your borehole is empty because the roots are all packed into that borehole. It's not really healthy. So it would be really suicidal for us to think about leaving such a plant to live with us, because someone was even saying, if there are so many benefits, why don't we grow it? I said, I think you don't understand what we mean by invasiveness. Invasiveness means that it's no longer a friend to us. It's taking over the party. So if it's taking over the party, then it means that the party cannot be enjoyed anymore. It's suicidal. And then going to Kim, we don't have information as to exactly how far it has spread up to Gaborone side, because that is why we said this. There has to be some studies to establish exactly where it is and come up with maps. Wherever we see it, it's like a notifiable disease, because it is regarded as a notifiable plant which has to be reported. If for any chance you stay or you live around Notwani area and you've seen it and you are not certain if it is the one, you need to report it to our offices, or so that we can go and establish if at all is the prosopis species that is so invasive, because our water bodies are really threatened.
I know she listed the places. Okay, maybe I said, can you come again on the other areas other than Kalahari and Ganzi, where you have seen it, where you have recorded it? I know you mentioned a few areas that you eradicated it. Can you come again? I've forgotten the names of those areas outside Kalahari and Ganzi where you recorded this plant. I think this will also assist Kim, who wanted to know whether it's coming near Gaborone.
Areas which we call hotspot areas that are already there and they've been severe, like in the Kalahari district. And then we've also seen it even towards Molepolole, Mabutsani, Good Hope. It's like it's all over. And then we also have Hansi, Tsabong, and Hukunzi. Now we've also identified in Boteti area, and Boteti, you know, that river is this Boteti river that goes to the Okavango and the Ngamilan. There's the Tamalakani river there. Those are very fragile ecosystems that we don't want them to be invaded. So we are seeing an emergence of them in Buteti River and the Ngamiland. So that's why we have decided to make a proper study as to establish through the different systems of geospatial to come up with a map to see exactly where it is, because we are seeing it approaching the main capital city, Gaborone. If it's in Kweneng, it means that it's threatening to come to Gaborone. So that's why we need to know where it is. And then the geospatial map would be also be able to advise that on its movement, if it's moving towards Gaborone or it's moving towards the Okavango Delta. All these are fragile ecosystems that they are of economic importance to Botswana. I submit.
Another question was about how do you balance ecological restoration with the livelihoods that depend on prosperity for firewood, like you mentioned in your presentations. So how do you get to balance that ecological restoration with the livelihoods of people living there who see this invasive plant as another source of their firewoods they're using? In other sense, yeah.
I tried to talk about it when I was mentioning the fact that it's already there. It's growing every day. It's giving us a problem. We cannot eradicate it overnight. What we are doing is we are trying to study its movement. As long as the study is able to advise us on how we can replace those trees that are moving towards a sensitive or sensitive ecological, like I was talking about rivers. We would continue to support communities to ensure that they utilize the prosopis species to benefit from them to improve their livelihoods. We cannot make this decision on our own, because if the government has come up with a decision to make study of manage it without necessarily disadvantage those who are living with it, it means that we have to manage it and employ all the necessary management strategies that we can. And that is why I was mentioning that this management of this species cannot be done without integrating all the methods. And by integrating methods, it means that livelihoods are also part of the integration, because we want to make sure that even the eradication or the removal benefits the people who are there. There will be certain forms. That's why we are bringing in the issue of charcoal and bringing the issue of firewood besides shade. And then the species is like, it's what you call it, where it's changing form. It's no longer the same species that was introduced. So this is the fear why we want to make sure that where it is, if we manage and bring in all the management practices that we are able to control it, it does not spread to areas that have ecological systems that are quite fragile and very sensitive. Those who are depending on it, that side, if we are managing with them that side, we should be able to come up with studies that will inform us. We are not going to stop at scientific methods only. We want to bring even the societal studies to see how economies can be brought in to utilize this invasive species without harming the people who live within it.
And now let's have another question from Sela Malanga. Dr. Sela, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Diane. My question was, you mentioned that these trees' roots go deep. So I'm wondering if you're doing the mechanical way, like of removing it, do you even remove the roots? If you remove the roots, does it have any effects on the soil? Yeah, that's my question.
The critical point here is not to just cut it, is to integrate mechanical methods with any other method that would make it completely go. I'll take an example of how deep it can go. The root can go as deep as 50 meters. But if you cut the supply of oxygen at the top, obviously you'll be killing the root system. And then where it's not easy, because it's I mentioned the fact that there's species which are capable within the same prosopis species of being able to resprout. It means that the way you cut it, it has to be so carefully done and so rightly done that you make sure that it's completely gone. And then that is why when we, after cutting the tree, we use less persistent chemicals to completely kill the stump where it's not done properly. So these are the methods that we combine together. If in some cases, we used to even dig a bit around it and then make sure that we make fire around it. The issue of soil will always be there because we are disturbing the structure of the soil once you do that. Hence, that's why the moment we take it out, we want to replace it with an indigenous plant next to it so that there is continuity of growth, so that the soil structure is carried forward to be protected without necessarily bringing in some other degradation methods to remove the soil cover around the place.
Benedict, you're welcome to ask your question.
I just want to find out to Ms. Baitsepi, how do you deal with the seed bank of the prosopis seed on the soil with regard to, do you have some successful strategy that you can perhaps share regarding dealing with the prosopis seed banks? Because I know even if you do the mechanical clearing whereby you'll apply herbicides for stump treatment to prevent regrowth, but you're still stuck with a batch of seed on the soil. So how do you tackle that? Can you perhaps share the success story with regard to tackling of the seed banks?
Thank you, Benedict. There's no success story, but what I can tell you is that because the people who are already living in the areas that are affected by prosopis, they have their own indigenous knowledge of how to utilize any other species that come into their territory. They have been able to utilize it in other forms. But what I can say is that because we are trying to incorporate fodder production within the same prosopis management, they can mix that with fodder. But what we have realized is that we are not doing very well in terms of seed bank, because once you do the seed and it's quite mature, it means that it will be able to even go into the droppings of animals that don't have the four-stomached ones. It will always continue to come back to the soil. And hence, because of that, hence we brought in to say that we are not going to be able to completely eradicate it, but at least we will be able to manage it so that they can benefit from it when it regrows, when it comes back as shrubs, when it comes back as any forms, because the seed bank will always be there. This is the place where we've not been very successful, to be honest.
I think I will agree with maybe it's happy that I think this tree has reached a point where we can't eradicate it. It's an ecosystem engineer. It has made changes to the whole Kalahari and Ganzi ecosystems, especially the Kalahari area. It's now the main species. Therefore, as an ecosystem engineer, we'll never reach a point where we have eradicated it. Like she rightly said, we just have to manage it to a level where it can coexist with other land-use systems, where even the community can still benefit from it without it, inhibiting other ecosystem services. Now, I also request Member Itsepi to, on this one, other areas that are invaded by this prosopis, Bomole, Polole, Mabutsana, and Good Hope, Buteti, and Ngamiland. Was this just the observation with your staff, or do you have a document indicating this as new records of new invasions? Or is just observations from your different districts? Is there a document that one can refer to that highlights the new areas?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kashe. The document that will ultimately establish those areas is the one that is being carried out in collaboration with the University of Botswana, where we'll be able to study on the distribution and spread. And then going back to the initial strategy that was made, the strategy was made to try to see on how we can manage the prosopis first. And then we realized that whilst managing it, like utilizing for other products and making use to be used to improve livelihoods, we realized that it was spreading. Now we want to curb the spread. That is why where it is still new and it's trying to, it's trying to be more invasive. We are starting with those areas like the Boteti area. That's why we are starting to try and remove it and replace it with indigenous trees. But where people are already living with it, we are just trying to manage it, try to reduce the density, map it, and see how much density it is. That is why we've brought in geospatial maps and the like. That document that will inform us and the extent of spread is the study that has been done by the University of Botswana. It will be an official document. It will be open document. It will be shared with those interested parties, particularly those who are scholars, because we want to come up with policy briefs towards that to make sure that we manage it properly and submit.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Patishep. I have the last question before we close. I have another question to Dr. Kesh. I know previous in your presentation you talked about biological control introducing weeds to Sylvania morestra invasive plant. And I was wondering if that biological control of weed is applicable to all aquatic plant invasive species, like let's say water hyacinth, or if there is specifically each invasive plant has to have its own biological control, or it can be applicable for all the invasive plants.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for the question. Yes, for the aquatic plants, it's host specific. Like I indicated, with the control of water lettuce in Kwando and Chobe rivers in 1987, the weevil was called Neohydronomonas affinis. That's the weevil that was very specific to water lettuce. But it became extinct around 1987 when the system dried. There was nothing to feed on. Then the weevil became extinct. But in 2005, because of the small infestations, the water lettuce was hand pulled and it was completely eradicated in 2005. So each aquatic weed or aquatic invasive plant had its specific biological control agent. For instance, Salvinia molesta, we used the Psychobacter salvini. The water lettuce, we had Neohydronomonas affinis. So they were very specific. Although I don't have much detail on the biological agent for water hyacinth, because that was a cross-border study in the Limpopo River Basin. So it appears that each aquatic plant has its own specific biological control agent.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Dr. Kashi has just said to you, that not only for the aquatic weeds, each and every biological control is host specific. In South Africa, the only biological control that tackles about 4 species is the Cactoplastis cactorum that works on 4 different cactus. But all biological controls are strictly host specific. They tackle 1 plant species in that genus of the plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict. Thank you so much. I appreciate your engagement throughout the session and everyone else. So as we conclude, I would like also to kind of pose a question to the speakers as they conclude or they do a call to action or a recommendation. But my question is going to be, it goes to both of you, Mrs. Petish and Dr. Kesh. How does those intervention, I know we mentioned about biological control, mechanical, but there is also chemical, which in the session, I really emphasize it wouldn't be a best option. But if we can come around, how do these intervention affect non-targeted organism, particularly beneficial soil organism, let's say on terrestrial invasive plant species and insects, and some of them they are pollinators in agriculture sector, but also general insects in general in the ecosystem. And how can we use these approaches to minimize these negative effects, and do like a general recommendation for the rest of the countries to learn from you? Thank you.
Yes, in my case, generally the use of agrochemicals within an aquatic ecosystem is prohibited. I was actually surprised to learn that paraquat and glyphosate were allowed to be used in the Kwando-Lenyati system when they were non-selective and they were killing every plant, probably including insects that were within that system, probably with residual effect, where they'll probably stay within the environment for the next year or so. So I'm completely against the use of herbicides. I still believe for any management of any invasive species, early detection and rapid response is the most cost-effective strategy, because you tackle the problem while it is still small. I'm yet to hear of any invasive plant that was completely eradicated once it has spread at national level. I'm yet to hear example of where an invasive plant that had invaded, a larger area was completely eradicated. Like some questions were raised, how do you deal with the seed bank? You might eradicate the mature plants, but the seed bank is still there. So that's where we come to management and control. You manage the population that you have to a level where it can coexist with other land use systems. To me, early detection and rapid response is one of the most inclusive strategies, because you are going to eradicate that small population before they become a serious problem. Public awareness and stakeholder engagement is also important. Stakeholders should know what is an invasive species, how is it different from our native species, because sometimes they think the ecosystem services that they derive from the exotic species cannot be derived from a native species. I think we should make them aware that no, those benefits for which we are importing this plant for are the same benefits we can get from a native species. I think public awareness, early detection and rapid response, those are very important. Of course, the framework should be an enabling environment from the government.
From my side, I would like to indicate the critical risks of having an invasive species and let it grow as it pleases. Is first the groundwater depletion, the biodiversity loss, expansion into high-value ecosystem, like I was talking about, fragile ecosystems like the Okavango and the water bodies across the country, and the long-term ecological damage if unmanaged. So now what do? We know that we have to consider that they are already occupying certain ecosystems and they are part of the livelihoods, and people are depending on them. We don't want over dependence on them or by creating an economy out of prosopis only. We want to bring in other economies, other like value chains that would change the lives of people using the same problems that they have around them. Hence, we want them to continue living in them. The mention of public education for never introducing new species into the country is very critical, because we are, as a department, before we became a competent authority or became by legally established by the law, a lot of people would want to bring these new plant species, thinking that they can give them fuel wood, or even biofuel. But why can't we use what we have and grow what we have and come up with biofuel from that? Is it because we want it cheaper or faster? And what are the implications for us as the countries? And this goes beyond our borders. Are we going to have increasing in the desertification because we failed to control certain species, or you brought in deliberately thinking that we want quick solutions? And the answer is always, let's find alternative ways. Lastly, I would like to say that we want to introduce the chemical control only where it's safe. This is why in our department or in our ministry, we have the department that deals with environmental protection. And then we are not standalone department. We also depend on plant health. That's why we also always try to make sure that we use chemicals that are less persistent to the environment, and those that can be selective or can only be used when it pushes us to use them, because applying a chemical even to the stump is also going to be harmful to the environment in the long term if it's not used properly, because of its less biodegradability or its persistence to the environment. Hence, we want to make sure that whatever we use is environmentally friendly. And then last but not the least is that we want to make sure that we employ all those control measures that would not damage the environment, but at least they would be able to benefit the people who are using those methods. So when we say we want to control, manage, and ensure that there's beneficiation to all what we have introduced already, we are simply saying, let's not do that by damaging the environment. And that's all from my side. I thank you. And thank you very much, colleagues, for having all the time to come and listen to us.
Thank you so much, everyone.